Alright, in this unit we are going to focus on sampling methods. We're getting into that part of the class where I really wish it wasn't online, where I wish we had a laboratory. We have two industrial hygiene classes. It would be so great if one of those classes had a real laboratory component. As we're talking about sampling, I'm going to be showing you videos of the different methods, but it would be so great if we could actually get the equipment out and have some practice using the different pieces of equipment and going through the different methodologies that are required to collect a sample. Sampling really isn't that difficult of a process. If the equipment's in good shape, if you have the right equipment, it's not difficult at all. There are a lot of people out there working for industrial hygiene companies, industrial hygiene specialist types of companies, who don't even have degrees. They're taught the procedures, they're taught how to use the equipment, and they do just fine. Any of you can do just fine with most of these sampling methods that are used in industrial hygiene. I am a proponent of bringing in a third-party industrial hygienist. I think that there are several benefits that go along with bringing in the subcontractor, but it is something we can do as safety management general practitioners. You're probably wondering why the heck I have the picture of the Tahlequah livestock cell barn up here. It's just, I talked about this last time I taught the class face-to-face. Again, every other time I've taught this class, it's been face-to-face. This is the first go-round for online. But last spring when I taught the class, we'd somehow or another talked about cows in a previous discussion. A lot of farm kids that end up at NSU, and I talked about this incident that happened at the Tahlequah cell barn in 2018. A cow that should be down here in the arena, she jumped out of the arena up into the office area, and this is, you can't see her in the picture to the right where I'm moving my cursor around, but she's in there right now. The picture on the left is her jumping back down into the arena. And it was pretty big news around Tahlequah, at least in the ranching community, the people who cared about cows and the cell barn and all that stuff. It was this lady here. She said that she had been the ticket writer for years at the cell barn, and she knew it would happen. One of these days it was going to happen, and it finally happened. on this particular day. But has nothing to do with industrial hygiene. Now, it does have to do with workplace safety. There are agricultural entities, corporations that are ag producers. They hire safety professionals. Now, Tahlequah Livestock Association or the sale barn out south of town, they probably have an insurance person come in periodically and do some training and provide some advice. They don't have a full-time safety person. But large feedlots, large crop producers, they have safety professionals. Some may even have industrial hygienists. Companies like Monsanto or Agricor, or there's a lot of big commercial corporate agricultural entities out there. Ag's big business, big part of our economy. So, and there are hazards within agriculture. But I digress. Let me move on to sampling. Very simple terms, what we're doing with the sampling process is collecting industrial hygiene data. It is a part of the evaluation process. When we talked about the evaluation process in the last unit, I talked about monitoring. Well, that's what we're doing. Sampling is monitoring. We're monitoring the workplace for contaminants, the presence of contaminants, the concentration of contaminants, and also the level of exposure for workers to the different contaminants in the workplace. Like I've done in previous units, I'm providing you with an index of links that you might want to explore. There's one difference though for this particular unit. I'm actually going to open most of these up during the video lectures and talk about most of these. Not all of them, but most of them we will open up and take a look at, especially the videos. Again, we can't actually do the hands-on laboratory activities, so I'll show you videos of the procedure. And when we're talking about grab sampling, I'll show you a video of how to use grab sampling equipment. Really simple process. We'll talk about in detail about using cyclones and particle impactors for taking samples of different particulate matters. The big example that I'll use to illustrate some of these processes will be the silica sampling that I did in 2015 when I worked with Manhattan Road and Bridge. I'll walk you through that process that I went through when we did that silica sampling. I've talked about OSHA technical manuals before. This is an excellent resource for safety professionals. These are manuals describing recommended procedures and techniques for a variety of industrial hygiene related activities. And what's contained in these manuals, these are not regulations. These are not rules that companies have to follow. The manuals are really intended to provide guidance to OSHA compliance officers. So OSHA compliance officers will know how to conduct sampling when they're in a workplace and they need to do sampling. But the procedures they use to conduct their sampling can be used by any of us who we don't have to work for OSHA to follow those procedures. The procedures that have been developed by OSHA and the industrial hygienists at OSHA, those are really pretty much the best practices across the profession. Many of the industrial hygiene textbooks that are out there, I would say most of them, at least 90% of the industrial hygiene textbooks that are out there are pretty much just a repackaging of the information in the OSHA technical manuals, at least when we're talking about sampling. So a very, very useful resource. And let me, again, we've looked at this before, but let me open it up again and show you what we're talking about. I've already got the my browser open, so I'll just drag it over here. Again, here's the web page for the OSHA technical manual. And if we scroll down, these are the links to specific chapters or sections of the manual. Here's the one on personal sampling for air contaminants. And a lot of excellent information. A lot of what I'll be sharing with you in this video will be from this manual. There's a cyclone. We'll talk about cyclones. It's a lot of good stuff. Different quantitative methods that can be used. Here's a sorbent tube, which we'll be talking about. And once you're out there working, let's say you end up needing to do some silica sampling, or you need to sample for other contaminants, other substances, this is a good resource to go to. Also, when you're working on your airborne hazard control project, this could be a resource. Now, here's some of the calibration equipment used to calibrate the different instruments. It takes you through the entire process. All right. And we may come back to this at some point. I'm going to show you some other resources as well. Before let me go back to one that that's a really valuable resource that I'll show you later on. Won't be in this video, but the Index of Sampling and Analytical Methods. This tells you exactly what you need to do when you're sampling for silica or asbestos or lead or ethyl alcohol or whatever it is. I was looking at it earlier. The document for ethyl alcohol sampling is 63 pages long. So again, it's really way more information than you need. But we'll talk about this some more later in the unit. Air sampling. I've kind of already said this, but let's just be more direct as far as a definition. A procedure for identifying workplace contaminants. They could be in vapor form, particulate form, could be biologicals, could be sampling for viruses or bacteria. A lot of what we've talked about already this semester and last semester in the industrial hygiene class, there's a sampling procedure to identify the presence, the concentration, and worker exposure. And we can really divide sampling into two different types here. We can do sampling to identify the concentration in the work area, even for specific tasks. That can be our goal of the sampling procedure. We just want to know what the concentration is during certain tasks and certain work areas. Or we can be more specific and sample so that we better understand employee exposure levels. Is the employee being exposed at levels above the action level? Are they above the PEL? Are they above the TLV if we use the TLV as a standard? Oftentimes, these two different objectives are combined. Now, when I did my silica sampling, I just focused on what concentration levels we encountered during specific tasks. And we can extrapolate from that information to what employee exposure levels will be. With sampling procedures, with most of these sampling procedures, there's one exception that we're going to talk about. With these procedures, we collect data on sampling media, and there's different types of sampling media that we'll talk about, but we collect the data on the sampling media. The media is then sent to an industrial hygiene laboratory for further processing. In that laboratory, they'll use gas chromatography. They'll use flame ionization detection technology. They'll use microscopes to identify the types of contaminants and the concentration of those contaminants. And for some contaminants, it's they extract the contaminant from the filter media onto a slide. They put the slide on a microscope and they count the number of particles. It can be that tedious. But unless we specialize in industrial hygiene, if we work as general practitioners, we will probably never see the insides of an industrial hygiene laboratory. We may see the insides, but we won't be doing the lab tech work. But again, that would be a possibility if somebody wanted to specialize in industrial hygiene. They could end up being employed as a lab technician in an industrial hygiene laboratory. And again, we're interested in exposure levels in many cases. And we can determine this from the work that goes on in the laboratory. Let me give you a scenario that occurred, I was going to say recently, but it's been about 3 years ago now. This was actually a student that came to me. Their mother had worked at a local hospital, and she had recently moved into her new office in a wing of the hospital that had been recently renovated. And he said, "Hey, mom's having headaches. She's dizzy." And I said, "Hey, you need to have your mom speak with someone in your facility about doing some sampling to see what contaminants may be present that could be contributing to her or causing her symptoms." And it wasn't just his mother; it was several of the workers who had moved into this new wing of the hospital were complaining of symptoms. Let me just read this to you. I've already said it, but let me read it to you. Workers at a local hospital moved into a recently renovated wing of the hospital. Workers feel fine over the weekend, but at work and through the work week, they become ill. Coughs, headaches, shortness of breath, dizziness, nausea even. I don't have everything on here, but just a whole laundry list of symptoms were being experienced by these workers through the work week. They would recover over the weekend, though, which that's an indicator that, hey, there's something going on here. And what's happening here is not that uncommon. When there is a building that's renovated, you're using new materials that can off-gas contaminants. You're disturbing the existing structure of the area that can release different particulates, mold, fungus, just all sorts of stuff can get stirred up during the renovation process. Again, I recommended to the student, somebody needs to take some air samples, analyze those samples for possible airborne contaminants, different particulates, vapors, off-gassing from the new building materials. Also, you need to investigate the ventilation system to see there may be contamination within the ventilation system, and that ventilation system is spreading these airborne contaminants all over this new wing, all over the hospital, in fact, perhaps. But it was only in the new wing where they were experiencing the symptoms. This is the type of workplace scenario if you have workers, even in an office environment. That's what we're talking about here, and I specifically use an office environment as an example because it's not just out on the factory floor or on the construction site. It could be in an office environment even. If you have workers complaining about certain symptoms, you may need to recommend to your supervisors the need for some type of sampling to take place to see if there's something in the work area that's responsible for these symptoms. And really what we're talking about here is indoor air quality, which is a major issue, and we'll get into indoor air quality when we talk about ventilation. We'll talk more about indoor air quality. So this is the type of circumstance where you would need to do some sampling. Sampling is also required when known contaminants exist in the work area, when we know that our operations create silica, when we know there's asbestos, or when we know there may be asbestos-containing materials or lead. It's required by OSHA for silica, lead, and asbestos, and other substances as well, that sampling takes place. It's not optional. You don't have to wait until somebody's showing signs of illness to do the sampling. It's required by law. When the new silica sampling regulations went into effect in 2017, companies had to have sampling data to show the level of exposure, the level of concentrations that their employees were exposed to in the workplace. For the remainder of this video, I'm just going to talk about very generally about the different types of sampling and some of the different procedures. Then in subsequent videos in this unit, we'll go into more detail. Personal sampling is one type of sampling. This is where a collection device is worn by the worker. The sampling period does not have to be for a full shift, but it should be. Or I don't want to say it should be, but ideally it's for a full shift. You can have a 1 hour sampling period. And from that 1 hour of sampling data, you can extrapolate from that what their exposure levels would be if they had that same exposure throughout the workday. So concentrations measured during a 1 hour of sampling can be used to determine worker exposure levels if that exposure level was throughout the workday. So that's personal sampling, where you put a device on the worker. Area sampling is where we have collection devices set up around an entire work area. We want to measure the entire work area. Let's say it's a laboratory, or let's say it's a machine shop. And we want to measure the concentrations of different contaminants in that machine shop or in that laboratory. So we may have multiple devices that are stationary set up all around that shop. We may have one collection device in each corner. We may have collection devices at ceiling height, at mid-wall height, and at floor level. We may have other collection devices set up away from the wall, out into the open spaces of the space that we're looking at. Again, multiple devices around the work area. This can help us, using this procedure, can help pinpoint a source of a contaminant. If we don't know the source of the contaminant, this can help pinpoint the source of the contaminant by having these different collection devices set up around the space where the sample is taking place. In some work establishments, these sampling devices are permanently installed, and they're constantly collecting data about the substances in that work area. In other scenarios, it's a temporary setup. We're going in, we're setting up our equipment for a day or two, or maybe a week, to collect data for a shorter period of time. Area sampling, as we'll see, and I'm almost giving my entire area sampling spiel right now, but the area sampling technology is normally going to be networked into a computer system. So you can see real-time readouts on a computer monitor of what the concentrations are of the different substances and what all the different substances are. Another methodology is called grab sampling. This is where a known volume of air is grabbed out of the atmosphere. It's then sent to a lab to be analyzed to determine the contaminants in the area. With this method, multiple grab samples may be collected from different areas within the workspace. Again, whether it's a machine shop or a laboratory, or maybe it's a hospital office area. You take multiple grab samples, and once those samples are captured in a specialized container that's used, it's then sent to the laboratory for analysis. Now, this sampling is short duration sampling. Now, the area sampling that we talked about, that could be long duration meaning at least a full work day. Personal sampling could be as long as at least a full work day. But this is, you can take a grab sample in 15 seconds. You just grab that sample of air. Once your container, your canister, your bag is full, the different equipment that can be used, then it goes to the lab. Sampling for particulates is a important concern for safety management. A lot of different particulates that exist in different workplaces that can cause harm. Silica gets a lot of attention here recently since the new law came out in 2017, but there's asbestos fibers, there's grain dust, there are a lot of different particulates. And we are talking about the microscopic stuff. And that's really for all of these different hazards that we're discussing in this class. I don't say all, but most of them, they're this, what we can't see is what we're concerned about. It's what you can't see in the dust or you can't see in the vapor that will do the damage, that will cause the physical harm. Sampling for particulates, usually conducted with the device called a particle impactor or a cyclone. Both of these devices have to be connected to a sampling pump, and we'll go through that entire procedure. All right, when we come back in the next video, I'm going to give you an example of particulate sampling from my experience with Manhattan Road and Bridge in 2015 when we did our silica sampling.